West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théères, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est long, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Perhaps the role of Konstantin Kilimnik in trying to interfere on behalf of a foreign adversary into our last election is why the FBI suddenly feels some new urgency about trying to get this guy. Konstantin Kilimnik is now, according to this new report, assessed by U.S. intelligence to have carried out operations inside the United States on behalf of Russian intelligence in 2 consecutive presidential elections in 2016 and 2020. The U.S. intelligence community believes in both of those elections he was running operations on behalf of the Kremlin to try to get Donald Trump into the White House in 2016 and to try to keep him there in 2020. And the reason his name is familiar is because his name did surface in big ways in the Mueller investigation. And his name surfaced in an even bigger way last fall when the Senate Intelligence Committee put out their bipartisan report on what happened in 2016. This guy Kilimnik had a starring role in that report, perhaps more of a starring role than any other single person. The Senate intelligence report said bluntly, Konstantin Kilimnik is a Russian intelligence officer. And that was an important blunt assertion because he was so involved with the Trump campaign in 2016 while he was apparently serving as a Russian intelligence officer. You might remember the reporting that Kilimnik went way back with President Trump's 2016 campaign chairman, Paul Manafort. You may also remember the reporting that during the 2016 campaign, Manafort, for some reason, decided to convey sensitive, non-public Trump campaign data, strategy documents, internal polling documents, to this guy, Konstantin Kilimnik, who was a Russian intelligence officer. Why did Manafort feed sensitive, non-public Trump campaign data to a Russian intelligence officer during that campaign while the Russian government was engaging in this big hacking and influence operation to try to help Trump win? The Senate intelligence report said, quote, Kilimnik likely served as a channel to Manafort for Russian intelligence services. The report also said that they could never discern exactly what was going on there. Why Trump's campaign chairman was shoveling all that Trump campaign material to a Russian intelligence officer. They said they never got to the bottom of it because even though, quote, Manafort was interviewed approximately a dozen times, he lied consistently during these interviews about one issue in particular, his interactions with Kilimnik, the Russian intelligence officer at the center of the committee's investigation. These lies violated Paul Manafort's plea agreement, which obligated him to be truthful in his cooperation with the government. Those lies therefore exposed Manafort to a more severe prison sentence than his plea agreement contemplated. Manafort's obfuscation of the truth surrounding Konstantin Kilimnik was particularly damaging to the committee's investigation because it effectively foreclosed direct insight into a series of interactions and communications which represent the single most direct tie between senior Trump campaign officials and the Russian intelligence services. That was last fall. That was the Senate Intelligence Committee's report. That report mentioned Konstantin Kilimnik more than 750 times by name. Well, again, that came out last fall. Now, in very short order, we know quite a bit more, right? Because that was in the fall. Then there was the election. Then in late December, Trump pardoned Paul Manafort for his crimes. So, big picture, that means Manafort effectively got away with whatever it was he was doing with Konstantin Kilimnik to help Trump, without ever telling investigators the truth about it. Trump effectively rewarded him for not spilling the beans about his work with a Russian intelligence officer while he was running Trump's 2016 campaign. Trump got him off the hook because he never squealed. That pardon was late December. In February, again, we saw the FBI suddenly slap a $250,000 reward out there for any information leading to Konstantin Kilimnik's arrest. And now we know, as of today, that what was going on behind the scenes in the interim is that the intelligence community was concluding that Kilimnik was not only involved in the Russian government's interference to try to help Trump get into the White House in 2016, he was also a key part of their efforts this time around to interfere in our election in 2020 to try to get Trump reelected. This is the declassified report that just came out today. Quote, we assess that President Putin and the Russian state authorized and conducted influence operations against the 2020 U.S. presidential election aimed at denigrating President Biden and the Democratic Party, supporting former President Trump, undermining public confidence in the electoral process, and exacerbating socio-political divisions in the United States. Quote, we have high confidence in these judgments because a range of Russian state and proxy actors who all serve the Kremlin's interests worked to affect U.S. public perceptions. We also have high confidence because of the consistency of themes in Russia's influence efforts across the various influence actors and throughout the campaign. Quote, a key element of Moscow's strategy this election cycle was its use of people linked to Russian intelligence to launder influence narratives, including misleading or unsubstantiated allegations against President Biden through U.S. media organizations, U.S. officials, and prominent U.S. individuals, some of whom were close to former President Trump and his administration. Quote, the primary effort the intelligence community uncovered revolved around a narrative that Russian actors began spreading as early as 2014, alleging corrupt ties between President Biden, his family, other U.S. officials, and Ukraine. A network of Ukraine-linked individuals, including Russian influence agent Konstantin Kilimnik, who are also connected to Russian intelligence services, took steps throughout the election cycle to damage U.S. ties to Ukraine, to denigrate President Biden and his candidacy, and to benefit former President Trump's prospects for re-election. Andrei Derkach, Konstantin Kilimnik, and their associates sought to use prominent U.S. persons and media conduits to launder their narratives to U.S. officials and audiences. These Russian proxies met with and provided materials to Trump administration-linked U.S. persons to advocate for formal investigations. They hired a U.S. firm to petition U.S. officials. They attempted to make contact with several senior U.S. officials. They also made contact with established U.S. media figures and helped produce a documentary that aired on a U.S. television network in January 2020.
It is Wednesday, the 17th of March of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Will no one rid us of these meddlesome priests? Only the meddlesome ones, because the ones that are helpful are quite helpful, I must say. Well, we awaken to another terrible tragedy. This ever-increasing hate against Asians has now manifested itself into a mass killing in Atlanta. As reports are coming in, it looks like the majority of the Asian women murdered are Korean. And Antony Blinken is over in that part of Asia, if not in South Korea right now. But he has been making a public statement about this tragedy and extending our condolences and apologies, of course, for it happening to the South Korean authorities. Yeah, so are we to say it's too early to tell? I mean, we don't know if it was motivated by race or misogyny. We don't know that because the guy was white, young, like incel age, and looks like, he might have a hard time getting a date. But he's got a gun, or 4 or 5, and he went to various locations. A lot of people said that this guy must have been flying to be able to get between these areas. And the cops did perform what's known as the pit maneuver. When someone's traveling at high speed and you bump their back fender area to make them spin out. So they performed that maneuver to stop and apprehend the guy. No word yet if they stopped at Burger King and got him a Whopper with cheese on the way to the precinct house. But we might hear about that. That usually happens in that part of the world. And so we don't know really what was this motivation, but we can suspect. All the signs are there. And I know that we don't want to prejudge, but, burn me once, as they say. Yeah, this has to stop. And our guy, the guy who's the president of the United States last week, said, hey, this Asian hate has to stop. I am sure that the right-wing press and the Russian propaganda machine, like OAN, and maybe even Fox. Fox may be useful idiots. OAN, yeah, they're assets. But anyway, they will be coming out saying that, it's Joe's fault for increasing the hate against Asians because he told America not to hate Asians. And if a liberal says something, you got to do the opposite. So it's Joe's fault. And I'm sure that the White House press corps will be all a-clucking like, why won't he answer this question? You know what's funny about the White House press corps? They've been whining about it. He won't give us we want a presser. Why has he not had a press conference? He has one every day. That's why they have a press secretary. Come on. But, they're wanting, we want one. We want one. So now they've scheduled one for the 25th, which is what, 8-9 days, right? Now they're whining like, why would he give a press conference in 9 days? What is he trying to hide? What is wrong with these people? 4 years of having this most monstrous person in the office of the presidency, calling them the enemy of the people and threatening them literally with death. But, the guy that goes to Mass every day because his dead son, he's still mourning his dead son. There's something untoward about that. Yeah, well, there's something untoward with a press corps that is existing right now, acting the way they are, now knowing what the 2020 Intel report has come out with. Enemy of the people? Well, you could be useful idiots too, at the best. Because there's plenty in the press not doing the work for America. Oh, we have to be objective now. Oh, yeah? We call it propaganda. Okay? So you push out the talking points from Vlad through Deripaska and Kilimnik. Then you're not advancing the great experiment. You're not reporting objectively on the great experiment. You're actively trying to destroy the great experiment. I guess there's a fine line between propaganda and journalism. But when one country has declared war against another, and you choose to take the side with that foreign power that has hostile intent upon us, enemy of the people, I would probably take that into consideration if you were objective. So I don't know. We're going to counter it with our own propaganda by being pro-American and pro-democracy. I guess that's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is that Vlad has no positive intent for the United States. He wants to partition it off and make it a bunch of franchises like Russia is right now. And he gets to wet his beak in everything. Okay? And apparently there's enough on the GOP side that I think they're salivating at the idea they might be able to be franchise owners too. Because isn't that what is the full result of libertarianism? Maybe. Yikes. Actually, I think the full result of libertarianism is nothing but anarchy. So these other guys, I think they're moving more towards a new kind of fascism that is rooted in an organized crime model. And that's exactly what Russia is right now. And that is exactly what Donald Trump tried to make America. But you know what? The institutions of America are still holding. And there's a lot more of us than there are of them. They're just loud, and we may consider that their power is more outsized than it really is. Because the squeaky wheel gets the grease. The people with the guns decide what polite conversation is. It's not how it works, or it's not how it should work in a representative democracy. And I think that those institutional safeguards are strong enough that at least people are taking notice. Except, and we've mentioned this before, over all these many years, 10 as a matter of fact, here at Netroots Radio, 10 years, celebrating our 10th year anniversary. So we've been mentioning this for a long time. As the numbers of these toxic elements decrease, the toxicity of those toxins increase. They become more potent. And what we are seeing now with the murder of 8 in Atlanta, I'm hearing 6 were Asians. They may all be women. But at least 6 Asian women of the 8. And that is a direct example of that toxicity, the potency of that toxicity increasing. I hate seeing it. We got to prepare for it. We can't shrug it off. We want to say their names and pronounce them correctly, by the way. It doesn't take that much. Okay, I know I butcher names all the time, and I apologize for that. But we could say their names. They don't have to be invisible just because they're Korean women. Please. What's on the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy? At the top, yes, the 2020 Intel report has been released, at least in its form for public consumption. And Russian agent Konstantin Kilimnik, who met with Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort in 2016, is named in the Intel report. And isn't it odd that, of course, this 2020 Intel report is pretty much an Intel autopsy on the election, which is what they have to do now because of what happened in 2016. And in that report, Kilimnik, and by extension, I would also, let's not forget about Deripaska. Okay, those aluminum factories in Kentucky for Mitch McConnell, okay, and Elaine, that Deripaska money goes a long way. So let's not forget about Deripaska too, but it is rather mysterious how talking points and strategies seem to be emanating from GOP officials, new ones like Josh Hawley, for example. We already know about Ron Johnson. And I guess it's a little bit of time for all of them in the barrel, indeed. On the rest of the menu, Republican attorneys general from 21 states are questioning a provision in the pandemic rescue plan that bars tax cuts. They got to have tax cuts. Oh, screw you. Just give the money to the people so they can feed themselves, you idiots. Massive voter outreach because of the pandemic resulted in a big drop of rejected mail ballots, and that's why they got to get rid of mail ballots. And the Biden EPA is toughening smog restrictions at power plants to protect downwind states. Now, this has been a concern for a considerable time, and isn't it lovely that as soon as we get an Interior Secretary like Deb Haaland, yes, let's protect the downwind states. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where a dissident band of Roman Catholic priests vow to defy the Vatican and go ahead and bless same-sex couples. Well, good. And Steve Bannon loses his bid to start a right-wing Catholic political academy in Italy. Oh, that and more. On West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, bon appetit. Bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is our chat room link, and our chat room is monitored, of course, by Kelly Lincoln. If you didn't know already, you know now. And also, Kelly has been very busy, so thank you, Kelly, for taking care of us. If you would then take a gander across the page to the left, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, there is the link to our Patreon page. If you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, and if you're able to, only if you're able to, send us the equivalent of what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink, if you could send those funds to us once a month, we are able to put those monies together with other monies and our own and pay our bills, fly under the radar, continue resisting as we have done for the last 10 years. Happy birthday to us. And fulfill our civic duty as the founders originally intended, because they did originally intend that we do this, and we are. And we have you to thank for your generosity in allowing us to fulfill our civic duty. Thank you. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, go to @NetrootsRadio. Tom takes care of that, and he's been pretty busy too. And thank you, Tom, for taking care of all that you take care of as well. Follow me on Twitter @JusticePutnam. And I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime, and then get that linked up on social media like Twitter. And that's what you do. Follow the show on Twitter @CookbookWest and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iTunes, all of them, iHeart, okay, every one of them. They're all there. Okay, this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is out of the Associated Press. Oh, yeah, I haven't forgotten. It's St. Patrick's Day. Okay, I'm wearing the green. It's just it's a little different. You know, growing up when we thought we were mostly, Irish, some German too, but mostly Irish. Yeah, the wearing of the green, especially since that's the Boston way to be Irish, huh? Yeah, we were fairly celebratory, but since my sister about 6 years ago, she got one of those DNA tests from, maybe not 6, but, a little, 5, 6 or so. Got one of those DNA tests, like Ancestry.com. One of those, the ones where they take your DNA and then they own you. So anything you do, they own. Don't replicate. They might own your offspring. Okay, just be careful. But anyway, we now find out that instead of Irish, we're Cornish. I don't know how I can live with myself. Anyway, happy St. Paddy's Day. Couldn't deal of the Associated Press brings us this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Republican attorneys general from 21 states are questioning a provision in the $1.9 trillion pandemic rescue plan that bars states from using its funds to offset tax cuts. In a letter to Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, they said the prohibition is unclear but potentially breathtaking. Really? Airing concerns that any tax cut could be construed as taking advantage of the pandemic relief funds. The Attorney General lists over a dozen instances of states currently considering new tax credits or cuts that they believe could be jeopardized simply because of the relief funds. The aid plan, approved by Congress in close party line votes and signed by President Joe Biden last week, includes $195 billion for states, plus separate funds for local governments and schools. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said yesterday, Monday, that Biden expects the relief funds to not go toward decreasing taxes. The original purpose of the state and local funding was to keep cops, firefighters, other essential employees at work and employed, and it was not intended to cut taxes, she said in a briefing. The Treasury Department did not immediately return an email requesting comment. In West Virginia, Republican Governor Jim Justice, no relation, has applauded Congress for passing a massive stimulus, but railed against the provision amid his push to cut the state personal income tax. Congress may not micromanage a state's fiscal policies in violation of anti-commandeering principles, nor coerce a state into forfeiting one of its core constitutional functions in exchange for a large check from the federal government. Oh, yes, they do. Where have you been, Jimmy? Signing on to the letter were Arizona, Georgia, West Virginia, Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Idaho, Indiana, Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, Oklahoma, South Carolina, South Dakota, Texas, Utah, and Wyoming. That's Wyoming to those of you who speak English, but out there they call it Wyoming. 3 Republican members of the U.S. Senate introduced a long-shot bill to eliminate the provision. If a state like Idaho wants to provide tax relief in the interest of economic recovery and to help people return to earning their livelihoods, the American Rescue Plan says it will be financially punished by the federal government, Senator Mike Crapo of Idaho said in a statement. A. Cassidy of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. The coronavirus pandemic triggered an unprecedented surge in mailed ballots last year, raising concerns that a flood of first-time absentee voters would lead to another record, more ballots tossed out for missing deadlines, signatures, or other reasons. Those fears never materialized. An analysis by the Associated Press found that the rate of rejected ballots was actually lower in November during last year's primaries, in several politically pivotal states, despite an increase in the number of absentee ballots cast. In one of the most striking instances, Wisconsin saw both a decline in rejection rate and the overall number of ballots tossed out. During the state's chaotic primary at the start of the pandemic, Wisconsin rejected roughly 23,000 absentee ballots compared with only about 4,000 ballots in November, even as the number of absentee ballots rose from just shy of 1.2 million in the primary to nearly 2 million. Election officials and voting experts attribute the declines to extensive voter education campaigns, work by volunteers to help find voters and fix ballot issues, and myriad efforts to make absentee voting easier, including new ways for people to track their ballots. Concerns about U.S. Postal Service delays also played a role, motivating voters to return ballots early or take advantage of a fleet of drop boxes that were deployed for the election. Everything they threw up, we just walked right over them. They're only obstacles, okay? They're only there to slow down an honest person, okay? All right? So they throw up an obstacle. We move around it. What are they going to do? Well, we'll see here. Because despite the success, Republican lawmakers in several states have invoked former President Donald Trump's unfounded claims of election fraud to propose strict limits on absentee voting. During this whole time, we always said, Vlad can't hack into mail-in ballots. You can't hack a paper ballot. Okay? But you can hack hackable voting machines. I know the intel report said that no votes were flipped and none of that happened. But why is it they want to get rid of absentee ballots? Because they can't manipulate them. People just vote willy-nilly like in a representative democracy. And you can't have that when you're trying to deconstruct the administrative state and turn it into something like, Nazi Germany. In the weeks following the election, Trump seized on preliminary reports of lower rejection rates in Georgia and Pennsylvania, states he lost. But the AP analysis shows November rejection rates also declined in Florida, North Carolina, and Ohio, states that Trump won. Ohio's rejection rate declined from 1.35% in the primary to just 0.42% in November. The state's chief election official, a Republican, credited more user-friendly voting materials and requirements that local election officials call and email voters about ballot problems rather than just notifying them by mail. Absentee ballots represented 36% of all those votes cast. Election officials and voting experts pay close attention to ballot rejection data because it represents, in most cases, people who were unable to vote successfully. Newly registered Black, Hispanic, and younger voters have had their ballots rejected at higher rates than white and more experienced voters, according to research by University of Florida political scientist Daniel A. Smith. For its analysis, the AP sought 2020 ballot data from swing states, Arizona, Colorado, Florida, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. In 9, it found the mailed ballot rejection rate declined. In a few states, election officials implemented extensive ballot tracking and notification systems, while various organizations mobilized volunteers to track down and help voters whose ballots were flagged for rejection. North Carolina and Georgia were among the states where groups made a concerted effort to reduce rejections. Well, now we know why they don't want anyone to vote. Reuters staff brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. The U.S. Environmental Agency said it will require power plants in a dozen states to cut their smog emissions starting this year as part of an effort to help areas of the country that are downwind of polluting industries. The move to finalize previously proposed changes to the U.S. cross-state air pollution rule is among the first actions by the EPA under its new administrator, Michael Regan, who was confirmed by the Senate last week and is expected to play a central role in President Joe Biden's push to crack down on polluters and fight climate change. The EPA estimated the changes to the pollution rule would reduce emissions by 17,000 tons beginning in 2021, thereby reducing asthma attacks, emergency room visits, and premature deaths. The agency first proposed the changes last year under the Trump administration after a court in 2019 found that the EPA had been failing to protect some states from significant upwind pollution. The action we are taking today will not only help states meet their clean air obligations, but more importantly, deliver cleaner, healthier air to millions of Americans starting this summer, Reagan said in a press release. Under the action, power plants in Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maryland, Michigan, New Jersey, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and West Virginia will have to cut smog-forming nitrous oxide emissions, acid rain, starting this summer by ramping up their use of existing pollution control equipment. Plants often switch off pollution controls for financial reasons. Oh, really? Further reductions in emissions from the plants could come from upgrading or installing new equipment, the EPA said. The public health and climate benefits are valued annually on average at up to $2.8 billion each year over the period 2021 to 2040. Maybe one solution is every time these companies turn off their pollution emission controls, because it might save them money, you just charge them what it costs for all of the emergency room visits for asthma attacks. Okay, let's get to our break. And when we get back from that break, we are going to go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, Lady Sings the Truth. Despite her 20th century fame, not a lot is known about Billie Holiday's real backstory. Indeed, when asked about claims in her own autobiography, she said, "I never read that book." Lee Daniels, The United States versus Billie Holiday, may not get everything right, but it is on point concerning the unceasing FBI harassment she endured literally to her deathbed. It's debatable that they were motivated by her anti-lynching anthem, Strange Fruit, as posited here, but from what is known of J. Edgar Hoover, it can't be ruled out. Holiday, as portrayed here, is the epitome of a tortured artist. Despite possessing an amazing voice and loads of charisma, Holiday struggled with drug addiction, toxic partners, and bad decisions. Despite her faults, though, the racial and political targeting she endured was untoward. Racist FBI agent Harry Anslinger, a holdover from Prohibition, targets her under the guise of the war on drugs and the additional pretext of the Strange Fruit song. Adding to the plot is a black undercover FBI agent who befriends Holiday but ultimately betrays her. Watching this one, the thought occurs that at the writing stage, the producers may not have known what they had in their untested lead, Andra Day. She's an R&B singer not only with singing chops but with acting ability, portraying going from glamorous to strung out in a way that belies her experience. Known earlier, a better movie may have emerged, with more emphasis on Holiday's life and art and less on the politics. The recent Judas and the Black Messiah kinda just went there. Day is the real reason to watch this, and she's already won the Best Actress Golden Globe. The United States versus Billie Holiday likely takes the liberties many biopics do. Nonetheless, it's worth a watch. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60 Seconds Science. I'm Mark Stratton.
Have you ever done something for someone else, knowing that your actions would solely benefit them and not you? Maybe you opened a door, or donated blood, or volunteered in a hospital's ER during the pandemic. This is called a pro-social behavior, caregiving, group coordination, conflict resolution, sharing. Humans engage in these types of behaviors all the time. We've learned that it's a large part of the reason we've succeeded as a species. But a major question remains in science. Are we the only species who do this? As one of our closest relatives, chimpanzees have long been studied for signs of this. Their genetic similarities could help us tease out the evolutionary trajectory of the desire to selflessly help others. So far, research has provided mixed results on the question. Studies of these animals in the wild and captivity seem to come to different conclusions. Some studies show that chimps cooperatively hunt, share food, and console each other. But one highly cited study came to a very different conclusion. It said chimpanzees are indifferent to the welfare of others. The study used what's called a pro-social choice test, a controlled lab experiment where chimpanzees in enclosures were given two options: push a button to give food to themselves, or push the button to give food to themselves and a partner chimp. If they chose the latter, it was seen as a pro-social behavior. In that study, chimps showed no special preferences for feeding themselves and a friend over feeding just themselves. Enter new research and a remote juice fountain.
We installed a button and a concrete fountain into the chimpanzees' outdoor enclosures. The fountain was then hooked up to a large container of juice placed outside of the enclosure. When an individual pushes the button, it releases juice from the fountain. However, since the button and fountain are approximately 5 meters apart, the individual pushing cannot directly drink from the fountain, and if any other chimpanzees are at the fountain when the button is pushed, they, and not the pusher, will be able to drink the juice.
That's Sarah DeTroy of the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, Leipzig. Compared to previous controlled lab-based experiments, the setup for this was very naturalistic, and DeTroy says chimpanzees were able to interact with the fountain in their social groups. In this context, they discovered a willingness to act in the interest of others, with individual chimpanzees prepared to activate the fountain without benefiting themselves.
We found that many of the chimpanzees were willing to pro-socially provide valuable resources to the group members, even if they couldn't benefit themselves from their behavior. And this behavior also increased over time. We can't, of course, know what the chimpanzees' actual reasons or motivations for pushing the button were. But the fact that they were willing, over the course of 2 months, to repeatedly perform an action from which they had very little direct benefits is really fascinating and displays a high capacity for pro-social behavior.
The degree of this pro-social behavior varied among 3 different groupings of chimps who were tested. They observed how groups who were more socially tolerant and felt comfortable around group members when in competitive situations were more likely to behave pro-socially, particularly more towards group members for whom they have an existing bond, namely kinship.
Our finding that chimpanzees can indeed behave pro-socially, and moreover show group differences in their behavior, suggests that there's a lot we don't yet know about their sociality. We might be more similar than we thought, and prosociality might have had a stronger role in shaping chimpanzee social behavior than previously assumed. We need more research to better understand the extent of chimpanzee prosociality, which will be able to inform us about the evolutionary past of our own unique human sociality.
Further research may reveal what lies behind their pro-social motivations. But for now, it's safe to assume that chimpanzees are not simply, and you'll forgive the pun, aping human behaviour. Their research is featured in the journal Science Advances.
Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60 Second Science, I'm Mark Stratton.
I'm probably okay to have one more drink before I drive home. I'm probably okay. I open the window to stay alert. Probably okay. I just popped some gum in my mouth.
Step out of the car, please.
I probably made a mistake.
Probably okay isn't okay when it comes to drinking and driving. If you see a warning sign, stop and call a cab, a car, or a friend. Buzzed driving is drunk driving. A message brought to you by NHTSA and the Ad Council.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
The proposed United States Citizenship Act of 2021, introduced in the House and Senate in February, would create a path to citizenship for most of the 11 million people living in the United States who don't have documents.
Soy Javier Luengo Garrido, organizador de la ACLU de Massachusetts, y este es el Minuto de Libertades Civiles con el abogado de ACLU, Bill Newman.
The proposed process would not be a simple or guaranteed one, and for most people it would take 8 years. An individual would apply for temporary legal status, which would require passing a criminal and national security check and proof that they've paid all their taxes. After that, they'd have to live and work in the country for 5 years, after which, if all is in order, they could apply for a green card. Then, after 3 more years, if they pass additional background checks, demonstrate proficiency in English and U.S. civics, they could apply for citizenship. Dreamers, those here under temporary protective status, and certain farm workers could apply for a green card without waiting the 5 years, although all the other requirements would apply. There is another exception. Long-term residents recently deported could also apply and might be granted an exception for family unity and other humanitarian reasons. There are many important parts of this proposed legislation, but as the debate on the bill begins, could we please start with an agreement on the need to pass this core provision of a path to citizenship?
El Minuto de Libertades Civiles es posible gracias a ACLU, porque la libertad no puede defenderse a sí misma.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1960. That was the day 5 Italian immigrant workers were killed in Toronto, Ontario, in what is known as the Hogs Hollow tragedy. Referred to as sand hogs, workers sought to connect a pumping station to the water distribution network. They were building a water main in a tunnel under the Don River. The project was already far behind schedule and over budget. Workers were welding in a compression chamber when smoke began to overwhelm the main shaft. Some workers made it out. Firefighters were prevented from releasing water into the tunnel to extinguish the fire over concerns that it would cause a collapse. In addition, there was no backup safety equipment at street level. The tragedy shed light on the appalling wage and working conditions immigrant workers faced just outside the city's borders. The persistent public outcry prompted exposés and investigations that revealed just how bad conditions were. It was truly a tale of two cities. Within the city, union requirements guaranteed breaks and enforcement of safety regulations. But just outside, it was a different story. According to Jamie Bradburn, who wrote for the Toronto Historicist in 2010, workers on suburban projects faced conditions that included lack of proper sanitation, poor safety inspections, illegal withholding of vacation pay, unpaid overtime, checks that often bounced, and groundless threats of deportation. The coroner's inquest determined that callous management, incompetent foremen, inexperienced workers, a disorganized rescue, and inefficiency at the Department of Labor caused the disaster. Though no criminal charges were ultimately laid, the sacrifice of the 5 men at Hogs Hollow brought about improvements in the conditions that had led to their demise.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. We always begin, weather from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 28 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high in the upper 50s, low 60s, and partly cloudy most of the day, winds light and variable. A few clouds developing overnight with lows in the mid to upper 30s and winds remaining light and variable. Tomorrow we'll be having rain showers in the morning, becoming a steady light rain in the afternoon, expecting about a quarter of an inch with highs in the low 50s. Winds out of the south-southwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour, and the region will be in an active wind advisory. We'll be having some winds here, but not the devastating ones that will be closer to Ashland. I'm in a protected valley with some protective ridges nearby, so lucky us. Pollen is still rated as none here in Rogue River proper. The air quality for the region is good at 29 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is moderate and ticked down 1 notch to 4. Barometric pressure is falling at 30.1 inches. Visibility, though, is up to 10 miles, and relative humidity is at 95%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that are crowdsources from around the world. London is 45 and partly cloudy. Paris is 50 degrees with rain showers. Rome is 48 and mostly cloudy. Kiev is 40 degrees and cloudy. Kabul is 54 and fair. Hong Kong is 71 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 49 and clear. Sydney, Australia is 65 and cloudy. Oh, congratulations to New Zealand Emirates. They won the America's Cup in New Zealand. So there. San Francisco, California is 42 and partly cloudy. And New York is 39 degrees and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that are crowdsources from around the world. Anonymous Reuters staff bring us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. A dissident band of Roman Catholic priests leading a disobedience campaign against the Vatican said they would carry on blessing same-sex couples in defiance of church orders. The Vatican said that priests cannot bless same-sex unions and that such blessings are not valid, in a ruling that disappointed gay Catholics who had hoped their church was becoming more welcoming under Pope Francis. Well, let me remind you, you got a lot of cardinals, and they're not necessarily along those same political or spiritual lines as a Pope Francis. Let's be clear. Now, in some countries, parishes and ministers have begun blessing same-sex unions in lieu of marriage, and there have been calls for bishops to institutionalize de facto such blessings. Conservatives in the 1.3 billion-member Roman Catholic Church have expressed alarm over such practices. Well, hell, they did over the guitar mass, too. They still do. We members of the Paris Priest Initiative are deeply appalled by the new Roman decree that seeks to prohibit the blessings of same-sex couples. This is a relapse into times that we had hoped to have overcome with Pope Francis, the Austrian-based group, said in a statement. We will, in solidarity with so many, not reject any loving couple in the future who ask to celebrate God's blessing, which they experience every day, also in a worship service. The Parish Priest Initiative, led by Father Helmut Schuler, has long been a thorn in the side of the Vatican. The group wants church rules changed so that priests can marry and women can become priests. It is said it will break church rules by giving communion to Protestants and divorce Catholics who remarry. Founded in 2006 by 9 priests, the initiative says it now has around 350 members from the ranks of the official church and more than 3,000 lay supporters. A lot less than 1.3 billion, but still. The Vatican in 2012 cracked down on Schuler, stripping him of the right to use the title Monsignor and saying he was also no longer a chaplain of His Holiness. Schuler, a former deputy to the Vienna Archbishop, Cardinal Christoph Schönborn, had been given the honorary title in his capacity as head of the Austrian branch of the Catholic charity group Caritas.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
This final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table on this St. Patrick's Day, by the way, is brought to us by Philip Poulela from Reuters. Steve Bannon, the former advisor to ex-U.S. President Donald Trump, has lost a legal battle to set up a right-wing Catholic political academy in an abbey in Italy. The Council of State ruled against the Dignitatis Humana Institute, otherwise known as DHI, backed by Bannon, which wanted to start the school in an 800-year-old monastery south of Rome. The case has been in the Italian court system for years, with suits and countersuits between the DHI on one side and the Culture Ministry, which owns the property, on the other, along with a group of local environmental and civic organizations. Bannon, a Catholic, was helping to craft the curriculum for leadership courses aimed at right-wing Catholic activists at what was to be the Academy for the Judeo-Christian West in the town of Tresulti. Bannon, in a statement, vowed to fight the decision. We intend to appeal and win. Tresulti is an Italian treasure, and we will fight for it, Bannon said. Many residents opposed the school. In 2019, the ministry withdrew a 19-year lease, citing violations of contractual obligations. The institute appealed to the regional tribunal, saying the move was politically motivated, and won the appeal last year. The Institute's founder, Benjamin Harnwell, confirmed the decision against the DHI in a telephone call with Reuters, but said he had no immediate further comment. He said lawyers were still studying the ruling. During the Trump administration, the project for the Institute found support among Italy's populist right-wing politicians, such as former Interior Minister Matteo Salvini. Over the years, the project lost support of key Roman Catholic conservatives, including American Cardinal Raymond Burke, who for years strongly backed Bannon and was an honorary president of the Institute. But Burke yanked his support after Bannon said he wanted to make a film from a book alleging homosexuality in the Vatican. Oh, really? Days before leaving office in January, Trump granted clemency to Bannon, a key advisor to his 2016 presidential run. And Bannon was charged last year with swindling the president's supporters over an effort to raise private funds to build a wall on the U.S.-Mexico border. He pleaded not guilty. All right, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. But you do know Netroots Radio will broadcast on, and we're going to meet up tomorrow for Metro's Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goer. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. De novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.